brilliant author Saksham Garg for Samsara, Enter the Valley of Gods by Penguin in conversation with Ms. Nina Rai. Saksham Garg is the author of the record-breaking, national best-selling mythological fiction novel Samsara, Enter the Valley of the Gods, which is being translated into many languages and was the highest-selling book at the recent New Delhi World Fair 2023. The magical world in his book Samsara has been inspired by Woodstock School, where he grew up in the lap of Lentor, Missouri. He spent 10 years writing this book, 4 of those as an editor at Penguin Random House, India, working primarily on fiction books for the company. Moderator Nina Rai. Nina Rai is an author and an artist based out of Delhi, India.
We have the last session for today, and I have been eagerly awaited to talk to Saksham. And before we begin, there are a few questions we'd like to ask the audience. And we'd like to ask the audience if anybody of you has read either, sorry about that, has anybody read Harry Potter, Chandrakanta, Lord of the Rings, Avatar, and watched the movie Bahubali? Show of hands, please.
Okay, so show of hands, how many of you are Harry Potter readers? Okay. Bahubali? Okay, anyone who hasn't seen Bahubali, raise your hand. Okay.
What about Chandrakanta?
Chandrakanta.
Oh wow.
Oh, brilliant.
Wow.
Okay, we'll move on to the question phase, right? Who here can tell me which is the oldest scripture in Hinduism? Scripture. Anyone? Yes, sir. No, not the Upanishads. No. Yes, someone said Vedas. Yeah.
Vedas. Yes.
Someone want to tell me which of the Vedas? The Rig Veda. That's absolutely correct.
10 on 10.
No. 10 on 10. But for another 10 on 10, sir and everyone. Yes, you want to say something? Yes. Yes, absolutely. The Rig Veda. So what I want to ask, and this is the final question that we have for this little starter round before everyone and we dive into the conversation, is that Hinduism is arguably the oldest religion in the world. And I'm saying, or it is established, that the Rig Veda is the oldest scripture in Hinduism. Ergo, Rig Veda is the oldest scripture on the planet. Now, this oldest scripture, all of you have heard. All of you have heard it occasionally, in few months, at some point in your life. It's used in something that happens daily, every day in India. The verses from the Rig Veda. Does anyone know where they are recited? You've all experienced it, yes. Very, very close. No, not temple, but something that is a celebration. Yeah, every celebration, but one particular celebration, and I'm sure that all 4 beautiful ladies sitting in front have witnessed it at a very, very important juncture in their lives. Yes. Yes, the wedding. Yes, wedding is where we have Rigvedic verses said out loud, and they establish so much because the Rig Veda is the reason this book exists. This book is a way for anyone to understand the most pivotal, fun, easy, and important to today scripture of Hinduism through this book, because the Rig Veda, like a lot of classical Hinduism texts, are very difficult to digest. They are written at a time where, they talk about things more than just materialistic things. And that's why you need a fun narrative book that can introduce you to the main characters of the Rig Veda. More than 2/3 of the hymns in the Rig Veda are dedicated to one man alone. Can anyone tell me who that man is? Yes. Not, he is in the sacred texts, but who is the main character? Yes, Lord Indra, who was at that time considered the king of the gods. So Lord Indra comes back to life through this book.
Fantastic. I have another question to ask. So we know the book that was the first. Can anybody tell me who was the first man? What? We're not for Christian book, yes. I mean for Christian theory, yes. No, the first man was Manu. Manu. The English word man itself is a derivative of the word Manav. And what is Manav? Manav means the progeny of Manu, the children of Manu. Can anybody tell me what lineage did Manu's children establish, and which was the first city established by Manu, which is the cradle of human civilization as per the Hindus? Any ideas? Yes. Ayodhya, yes. Not Indus Valley, Ayodhya. So Manu established Ayodhya as his kingdom, and the progeny of Manu ruled Ayodhya, and Ram himself was from his lineage. So here today we are talking of firsts. The most important god Indra, the first Manu, the first, the books. And with all that lovely information that we've given you, I'm going to proceed and ask Saksham some very interesting questions. So hear us. So Saksham, what made you write about the gods?
Before I answer that question, how many of you believe in God? Okay, how many of you don't and consider yourself atheists? Right. Yeah. Or agnostic, or the many different options that one has on the idea of God. This book, and why, to answer your question, Nina, did I write about the gods? This book is about 10 modern day Indians from 2023. Like you, like me, with their glasses, smartwatches, modern day relationships, and इनको kidnap करके एक प्राचीन valley in the Himalayas that is mentioned not only in our sacred texts. Himalayas की तीनों तरफ, there's also China, there's also the Buddhism as a religion, Shambhala, Shangri-La, Siddha Ashram, Vanyasa, Gyan Gunj, they're all names of that same magical valley. जो माना गया है throughout ages that there are gods, mythical beasts, immortal yogis living there. So what happens when these 10 modern day Indians हमारी तरह, उनमें से main character doesn't believe in God, is an atheist. There are people who are going to this magical valley, kidnap hoke, and they're coming face to face with the gods, but they are scientists. They have always understood science as their religion. Some of them believe in both, like Schrödinger, Heisenberg. In fact, Schrödinger and Heisenberg referred to Indian scriptures to understand astronomy. So, even the string theory is discussed in the Gita, I believe. Nina is an expert on a lot of these scriptures. So, the reason I wrote about gods, to answer your question, Nina, is because I wanted to explore कि क्या होगा अगर यहाँ से 10 लोगों को, some of them know each other, some of them don't know each other, एकदम से उठा के यहाँ पे कोई नहीं है, हम 10 लोग हैं, and suddenly Lord Shiv walks up to you. What do you say to him? The atheists might be surprised, might want to run away. The ones that have always prayed to him might fall to the floor in reverence. The scientists might try and rationalize what he is seeing or she is seeing. So that is the concept in this magical world.
Okay, that was lovely. And you speak so nicely about all of this, for the string theory. Have you yourself read the Vedas, the Puran, and the Itihas, or have you just read snippets of them?
I've read snippets. So the thing is, Mahabharata, which is one of the two Itihasas other than Ramayana, was recited to me growing up by my mother, who's sitting there also. And she used to tell me before I used to go to bed every night the story of Mahabharata. But no, I have not read the Vedas. And funnily, no one has. Or at least that's what is considered. The Vedas are difficult to understand. They need to be reflected upon the Upanishads because they're not a story. It's a collection of hymns that make very little sense individually. And you need a guru, and you need training, and you need to know Sanskrit. I think you know a little bit of Sanskrit. And you need to know that to even try and scratch the surface. So a 17-year-old boy who started writing this book 10 years ago was not poised to try and take on the Vedas or to try and take on any of the others, the Puranas, whether it's the Shiv, Vishnu, Brahma, Adi Yogi. There are 4 different kind of Puranas alone. and they're not even considered scriptures. So it's so vast. I was not poised to do that. To answer your question, Nina, no, I did not read the Vedas, but I relied upon those who had dedicated their lives to it. And I made sure that in my research, secondary research of these pious, holy, ancient texts such as Rig Veda, I was relying upon those who knew what they were talking about. So, हर तरह का angle, किस ढंग से उनको समझा है, कितना time लगाया है, I looked at that. The anglicized translation from Wendy Doniger, जो Indologist हैं West में, जिनके translations को यहाँ पे ज़्यादा prefer नहीं किया जाता है, और PhD scholar, Sanskrit scholar, Dr. Sukumara Bhattacharya ji, she's done tremendously, passed away in 2014, but her translations of the Vedas and others as well. So I have relied upon others' expertise to try and bring to the readers the fun, powerful narrative of the war between Indra, king of the gods, and Vritra.
That's lovely. And it's so nice to hear that your mother used to tell you stories of Mahabharata. It is something that I think that the current generation lacks. Even when I was growing up, I had the blessings of my grandmother who used to tell me all the stories. And that is what got me interested in Itihas. So it's lovely to know, Mrs. Garg. So you said it took you 10 long years to write this book. How come? And what were you doing to prepare yourself?
I was teaching myself how to write and how to edit, because writing is 10% writing, 90% editing, rewriting, polishing, and I did not study English in college. I went from school to college studying economics and then into the editorial team at Penguin because I was a self-taught editor. I had learned editing in my own unique way. And believe you me, when I say that I did many, many fresh drafts of this book, and throughout that entire process, there was only one aim. From 17 to now, 10 years, right? I have only had one aim, is to make sure that I'm bringing out a book that is powerful, full of emotions, all different kind of emotions, true to the Itihas, and tries to bring forward the core message जो classical Hinduism में है, that we are a peaceful, tolerant religion, and that is what lends Hinduism the power.
That's very nice. And you talk about editing. You're an editor with Penguin Random House. What made you become an editor?
What made me become an editor?
Yeah.
4 or 5 things, okay? I'll try and summarize them very quickly for you. Number 1, independence. As an editor, I had all the independence in the world. You say too many cooks spoil a broth. Already someone has dedicated their life to writing a book. If I'm getting the opportunity, I work on it, and I work on it independently. There is not someone else. I work on it independently. I give it the time. Number 2, you learn so much. I get to learn when I'm reading in different types of books. Number 3, I grew up reading, and I used to try and find errors in books while I grew up. So I wanted to be that person who made sure that the book was going out without errors. And having sold over 30,000 copies of Samsara in the last 4 months, I'm very, very proud and happy to say that I'm yet to come across someone who's found a typo, in the book. As an editor, it was so important for me to make sure there wasn't a typo in the book. And most importantly, number 4, the reason why I wrote this, so I became an editor, is because, again, like I said, the 10-year journey was about one thing. How can I bring about a fantasy novel in India? The way that they say in publishing कि fantasy नहीं चलती India में. People will rely on Western authors. I wanted to have a book that was so polished, so commercially apt. I wanted to understand how I could redefine the book, rewrite it. So even in my 4 years at Penguin, in this 10-year journey, after 6 years of writing the book and the 4 years at Penguin, I rewrote it again, once more, after all that I had learned, to make sure that the book was nice and palatable and able to reach all different segments of the country.
That's a lot of hard work. Lot of hard work. How many hours did you dedicate? So Are you an author who gets inspiration and then writes, or are you one of those dedicated authors that dedicate 2 hours in a day, or let's say 10,000 words you've got to write, or let's say 1,000 words every day? So what sort of an author are you, and how many, like how much did you sit down and write for all of this?
I think it's a very, very bold thing for me to say, but I think the Vedic gods and Lord Indra really wanted me, or just anyone, to tell their story, and I was willing to do it. So they came and they said, put our story out there and remind people about the core classical Hindu gods, right? That talk about something so important like rain that can make a session go from 8 p.m. starting time to 9 p.m. starting time. Lord Indra blessed this very session, right? And I wrote purely from inspiration. But the funny thing is, inspiration, not schedule, not, routine, but my inspiration was so almost divine-like. I was so filled with it that I was writing all throughout the 10 years. I felt like every moment I got, I wanted to write. I did not watch movies for these 10 years because I felt that those 3 hours was 3 hours I was going away from maybe making one page the best it could be. So I would dedicate that time. I cannot get started on how many hours and how many different computers and how many playlists and how many different locations flash in my mind. Just the wall and my computer in front when I think of the 10 years that have gone into it. It's innumerable.
That's amazing. That's really heartening to know. That's very lovely. And I totally agree with you. We don't choose to write the book, especially if you're writing about gods. They choose us. There's a saying in Hindi that if anybody even wants to become a bhakt, जो भक्त बनते हैं वो अपनी मर्जी से नहीं बनते हैं. भगवान हमें चुनता है तभी हम भक्त बन पाते हैं. So great, kudos to you. You're one of the lucky ones.
Thank you.
So based on choosing, what made you choose Penguin, or did Penguin choose you too?
No, I chose Penguin. Again, I'm going to go back. The aim was always 10 years mein, this book needs to come out, and it needs to come out with the best support and the best weight behind it, so I could get the message to as many people. So with the kind of support that I'm saying I had, I was hoping, and I was lucky to get Penguin. So right after college, I decided that I want to be in the best publishing house. And I scoped out Penguin, and I was lucky enough to join, after studying economics, the editorial team.
And when did you actually start writing?
Funnily, so I've been telling people it was when I was in 11th grade, 17 years old, 10 years ago, like I said. But I recently went back to a school gathering with my friends in Woodstock School, and this was before even 11th grade, and they told me that I was discussing the idea of samsara even then. So the idea came long ago, but the first words were penned down exactly 10 years ago.
So Penguin seemed to have helped you a lot. What kind of editing and marketing skills did you learn at Penguin?
So the industry term for what I learned is called positioning. But in basic terms, what it means is किताब का cover कैसा है, title कैसा है, किस तरह से उसको package किया जा रहा है. This is the role of a commissioning editor. And that is one of the most important things I learned, is क्या cover पे होना चाहिए. And that is why जब samsara का cover भी बन रहा था, the idea was to make sure that the cover was unique than the other books, that it did not follow Amish Tripathi sir and his covers to showcase that it is mythology, that it had something unique and something that shows fantastical. So I could get started on the many, many different things I learned about editing and marketing a book at Penguin, but I think this positioning is the most important.
And what was your marketing process for Samsara? Because it's done wonderfully, and I mean, you've done a brilliant job with it. So tell us about it.
Thank you so much, firstly, for saying that. The marketing process was always about one thing, and that was to connect with the readers. The introduction for me earlier mentioned that Samsara broke the record at the recent Pragati Maidan World Book Fair that happened very, very recently as the most books sold. And the reason that happened was because the thing for Samsara has always been about trying to connect with the reader directly. इसलिए मैं वहाँ पे खुद खड़ा था, गेट पे, Penguin की stall पे, to talk to every single person that walked in and to tell them about why, don't laugh, why I spent 10 years writing one book and why it was so important. So that in itself is the core of the marketing. It's not about social media, it's not about offline retail and the many things I discussed. It's about how many books can I connect, can I sell, or can I get to the reader, or can I get a reader to understand my vision in person while standing there talking to them. Because I feel like more than the book, we're also talking about who we are as a person. You know, Nina and I were talking earlier, before this session started. And something she said was very interesting. She said, our works can never be better than us, or can never be more intelligent than us. So at the end of the day, the ideal scenario is that your work is as good as you, right? That's the ideal scenario. And the reader, I believe, is going to remember. It's going to remember the fact that they met the author. And they're going to take that extra effort to read the book. Because I ask you, we go to bookstores and we buy so many books every time we visit, but how many of them do we end up actually reading cover to cover when we return home? And therefore, readers that have been so supportive, like Vanshika, who's sitting right there, secretly hoping I don't mention her name, you know, like a lot of people, the reason they are there is because at some point, I've had the great honor of connecting with them and talking to them about my book and consistently badgering them every time I meet them that have you finished reading the book? You know, I think that's been the core of the marketing.
So I spoke in the context of gods themselves, and I spoke of the Sankalpa Stotra, or the Sankalp that we take before we actually take any prayer, any Vrat and Navratris around the corner. So my book contains the Sankalp Stotra, and why I was discussing it with him is because the Sankalp Stotra is a time and a geolocation pin for any prayer that you make. And any prayer that you make, it is in the universe till eternity. And people even before and after us can connect to it. And the reason I explained to you is that the ones who have created us are far more intelligent than us. The ones who made this universe, this Brahman, this solar system are far more intelligent than us. And we have created the book. So the book is not going to be as intelligent. So whenever we make a prayer, that prayer goes to whom it is supposed to go to. So this is the discussion about the intelligence of those who have created us. So you mentioned some very interesting things about engaging with the audience. What tools did you employ in the book to keep readers engaged in fantasy worlds?
In the book, that's interesting. I think the most important thing was relatability. जो characters हैं इस book में, वो हम लोगों की तरह हैं exactly. And इन लोगों को उठा के suddenly आप एक ऋग वेदा से inspired magical valley Himalayas में जो आज भी हिंदू gods को contain करती है, जो secretly पूरे India को control करते हैं, that relatability. For example, one of the first things that happen when you get kidnapped and sent to this valley is, how do I get out of here? Phone में battery नहीं है, smart watch dead हो चुकी है, चश्मे की वजह से धुंधला दिख रहा है, because आप कल्प वृक्ष की shade में हो, आपको चश्मे की ज़रूरत नहीं है. And the magical thing is happening, you know, you've never seen anything without your glasses. And that is what I think is the relatability of the characters, I think, is the main reason why readers have liked the book. And we were talking about marketing earlier. I do want to mention, because it's impossible without it, is that the reason why this book has managed to reach so many readers, why iska Hindi ka anuvad, Gujarati, the audiobook, all of these different fun things are happening around the book, is because, again, the marketing was not just about connecting with the readers. I had so much support, you know. One of my best friends returned from Japan, left everything just so that he could be with me in helping promote the book. My parents have set up, you know, the company is running the marketing from the back end. The office has gone belly up just to run Samsara. My friend Bijit, Vashish, they're all here and they've all taken on different roles, working tirelessly, endlessly, all of them for Samsara. And much like the book, much like the writing of the book, the marketing in itself also has very little to do with me. It's just different people enabling it. Yeah.
Amazing. It's great to have so much support home and as well as from friends. Now, why did you choose your genre to be fantasy? What was the reason behind choosing fantasy? You could have written an explanation sort of a book or a research book, like a non-fiction as well. So why did you particularly choose fantasy as a genre?
I don't think I could have written in any other genre. I have exclusively read fantasy growing up. I have reprimanded myself for not stepping away from fantasy at different points in my life. Writing is breathing out, and the only breathing in I had done was of the pages of fantasy books. So it was inevitable that I was going to bring out a fantasy book and nothing else. If I start reading and understanding and even feel like I can try and emulate the greats in another genre, thriller, romance, किसी भी चीज़ में, उसके लिए मुझे पढ़ना पड़ेगा. Fantasy मैंने पढ़ा है काफ़ी. And I'm sure you're going to ask me about which authors it is that I've read, so please.
So I was going to ask you, before I ask you the next question, one of the most interesting things that I came upon was that we become what we consume. So we have this body, and this body is this body is called the Annamaya Kosh. And the reason it is called the Annamaya Kosh is because it is full of Anna. That means it is made up of Anna, grains. So we call this the Annamaya body. And so what we read then gives us our Manomaya Kosh, our mind, and therefore what we feed our mind is how our life will turn out to be. This is the wisdom of of the scriptures. So when you say that you breathe, you devoured that, it totally makes sense. You would only come out with a fiction.
No, but Nina, you make a very interesting point. I quite like what you just said, because I want to ask you guys, everyone over here, we are consuming so much, or at least our mind is consuming so many different things, from Instagram reels to YouTube shorts to people shouting in the news, you name it, right? And my question to you is that in this age, जहाँ पे people of all ages, not just the young, are being burdened. मतलब एक अलग बात है कि भाई बच्चे are doing too much of reels, but everyone is doing reels, everyone is consuming it. How many of you, you don't have to tell me, show of hands, think they know more than 3 good reasons why book reading or the art of reading is so important in your head? Because I'll tell you, right? Of course, it just improves concentration. It's great for memory. It gives you a break from the devices. But most importantly, it's a way to turn off. It's the only way these days where you can get some good night's rest. Not consuming or seeing a blue light before you go to bed is so important. And that's why reading today serves a greater purpose than just stories. It is the antidote to everything else that we are doing.
So going back, who inspired you to write fantasy, and whose works did you read the most?
So the answer for the first one, funnily, is not a fantasy writer. Who inspired me to write this book and fantasy? That's actually my family, my grandparents, my parents who told me about Chandrakanta Santati, my granddad, who... So this book has a lot about the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It talks about meditation, the magic in it. It's been compared to Harry Potter. On the back cover, it says India's answer to Harry Potter. And Harry Potter में there are wands, right? इसके अंदर जो magic है, the magic system or the jadoo in the book comes from the Patanjali Sutras, right? And it's about pratyahara. It's the withdrawal of the senses. There are 8 limbs. उसमें से 7वां बोलता है, it's the withdrawal of the senses, where your soul, जो आपकी आत्मा है, it breaks away from your body and it can join any divine living being, any living being. And that also connects with the ancient and the core meaning of
It's called Siddhi.
And also the idea of ahimsa. Why this ability to join any other? You know, the ahimsa, by ahimsa, I'm not referring to the Gandhi Ji's understanding of ahimsa. I'm referring to the original, where animals are equal to humans, are equals to trees. And therefore, when you conduct pratyahara, Atma Yoga, in this magical world, your soul can detach itself from your mortal corporeal body and attach itself to anything. And so if you open your eyes after this meditation, you could be flying above DLF Saket Avenue, you know, Avenue Saket, and looking down upon a literature festival. Or you could be at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, exploring its depths through the eyes of a fish. Or you could be logged in for 100 years with your breath slowing down because you're inside the hollow tree of a banyan. And therefore it lives that long. So that is the magical concept that I've derived, using my own imagination, of course. But through this magical journey, through the sugar coating that is love, loss, magic, pain, you get the pill of the Rig Veda, the pill of the core of Hinduism, that is that we are a peaceful, tolerant religion.
Lovely. And why do you think, I mean, do you think that the fantasy genre in India is still at its nascent stage, or do you think we have enough authors today?
I don't think we have enough authors today. I am hoping that Samsara and other books that come after it can together bring about a wave of fantasy. Because why is fantasy different from other genres? For one reason, thought experiment. Fantasy allows you to change the real world, change one thing about it, and use it as an experiment. Someone dedicates 10 years to their lives thinking about the niceties of how our lives would be different agar ek cheez badal di jaye. That's the idea of fantasy. Fantasy is studied for thought experiments. आप जाके कुछ चीज़ को पता करना चाहोगे, you will not be able to dedicate 10 years of your life to it. Someone has already done it. And fantasy requires a rich culture to execute. India has abundance of that, of its itihas. And it is a pity that we haven't done enough. So I am happy that Samsara has managed to do it to a small degree, and a lot of other aspiring authors have reached out to me in the last 4 months since the release of this book, saying they themselves are writing a fantasy book, and they're glad to see that Samsara has done well and they have hopes for their book.
Lovely. Tell us, so I'm going to open for questions to the audience, and before that, I want to ask you one of the most interesting points. How did you go about developing your characters? Because your whole book is about characters. There's Idhika, there are others, and you know how they meet and all of that, right? And you know there's Vanyasa, so you've created places, you've created characters. How did you come out with these characters? Who inspired you? Are they inspired from real people? How did you go about choosing their names? What did you do? What was your process of, you know, making characters and making very interesting characters?
So I followed a 3-step approach to the characters. I put thought behind the different kind of characteristics I wanted to give them: atheist, theist, rich, poor, tribal, agnostic, and proper theist who practices every day. So there were varied characters that were coming to the magical world. Secondly, where were I getting their personality traits and quirks and idiosyncrasies about? You know, if someone shakes a leg, so where was I getting all of that stuff from? That was about, you know, that was from my friends, people that were surrounding me. And as an editor and writer, I like to actively sit at places and just observe, actively observe, not subconsciously. So things from that, you know. And thirdly, you asked me about the names. So the names, much like the magical world, is to a large degree a figment of 10 years of imagination. Something that is a lot more interesting, because I believe agar aap log abhi jaake, you want to read about the Vedic gods, and आप Wikipedia या more reliable sources खोल के बैठ जाओ, you may, believe it or not, bore yourself to death more than right now. You know, you will actually find yourself extremely bored. But you need a fun, magical narrative like samsara, to see that lens. So I relied on Sanskrit etymology, and we were discussing idika or idika, right?
Idika, but actually
right.
it's idika.
Right,
Because the
idika.
Sanskrit word is id.
So I would take Sanskrit lexicon etymology and I would slightly manipulate it for phonetic purposes, what I thought sounded nice and unique. And that has been the core idea behind the book, is to take the cool aspects of classical Hinduism, give them a modern twist, and present it to you on a fun-filled, emotional roller coaster journey of a dish that is samsara.
Well, Indra is very happy with you. You know that. The minute we sat here, it started raining, right?
No, but he deserves that because see, Indra went from the king of the gods in the Rig Veda to insecure, hedonistic, sometimes with Sura Paniyam in his hand, thoda sa always insecure god in the Itihasas.
In the Itihas, then
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
accused of, he has an affair with Ahilya.
Right.
And the reason he does that, and he's very insecure, that's the reason he does that. Because Ahilya's Gautam is he's so powerful that Indra may lose. So what does Indra do? Indra goes and has an affair with Ahilya so that it will destroy the penance of her husband. So Indra does become that. And by the time Krishna comes, Krishna says, get away with it. So he does away with the Vedic gods, and then we have the Tantric gods. So the present day Hinduism that we practice is more Tantric, right? A lot of people find it very amusing, but the Tridev are a part of the Tantric. So now we have Hinduism wherein Vaishnavism, Shaivism and all these things are practiced, which is a part of Tantra. So with that, we'd like to ask the audience if they have any questions. Please do ask us.
Is it possible to get the mic? Thank you.
So I have a question for you here. So I've spent the better half of the decade teaching and studying story structure, right? And we've had this conversation throughout multiple drafts of Samsara. And I always used to wonder, what's the relevance, what's the significance of the title? Why Samsara? Because Samsara, per the dictionary meaning, is the cycle of life and death. There must be more, there must be more. And this is just an observation, correct me if I'm wrong. So I was reading this Pali meaning of samsara, and it meant eternal wandering until you, in the world ocean, until you find moksha, right? And coming back to the characters, to the 10 characters, and I'll get back to the relatability here. I generally find the characters quite relatable because they don't come from the same background, be it class, be it caste, and especially religion. Yes. It doesn't discriminate, and that's beautiful. Yes. Because this is what you've done, and I truly respect you for that, because you did justice to each of these characters from multiple backgrounds, from multiple religions, which is something quite impossible for a writer to do. And I really put my hats off to you for that.
First, you said that, your book is more of a fantasy. Does that have anything to do with the fact that you were in a boarding school, sort of cut off from the, rest most of the time, like it's you are in your own world, cut away from the family with your friends, then, not exposure to so many of other distractions being in a boarding school. So did you choose this particular genre for that purpose to narrate your story in?
I'll answer this question before your second one. No, I think the only influence my boarding school had on me is that they introduced me to reading at a very early age. The boarding school, had a lot of influence on reading, and when they, urged me to go to the library, I think I got quite enthralled by Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. So that was 7th grade or 6th grade. And at that time, I'd already read a lot, but that was the first monumental shift in my mindset where I felt we need something like this for the Vedic gods. So the only influence that boarding school has had on my affinity towards choosing fantasy has nothing to do with its isolation, but actually has to do with the fact that it just pushed me into reading.
No, I was referring to the, some sort of, because I myself have studied in Missouri. I did my schooling
Oh,
from
wow.
Missouri. And I went there when I was 9 years old. So sometimes as a small child, as a young child, you tend to escape into another kind of world. So maybe at times to console yourself or to, just make yourself happy, things like that. So that's where I was talking about. And the second question is, as an editor and an author both, what and who prevailed at the time of the final draft of your novel?
No, definitely the editor prevailed because the reign of the author was long over. मतलब जब मैं भी किताब को edit करता हूँ, the author has already done what they have to do. Of course, they have the choice to accept or reject my suggestions. Mostly. Mostly I give them that option. But the final stage is always the editor. Because the editors have already refined in making sure कि गड़बड़ नहीं हो. They're only making it better. So 6 years of writing and pure authorship, 3 years of constant tug of war between the editor in me that I was trying to hone and the author in me that I already knew, and then that final 1 year where I let the editor prevail. Thank you for that great question. Yes.
सब कुछ उठाने के बाद हिंदी के हाथ क्या लगा श्रीमान? आपने
हिंदी की
का
बुक आ
क्या
रही
भला
है,
किया?
हिंदी में बुक आ रही है.
अरे।
So not only has she translated her own book into
नहीं,
Hindi.
नहीं, नहीं, मेरी सवाल पूरा सुन लो. मैं अनुवाद की बात नहीं कर रही, मैं तो खुद ही छाया अनुवाद की उस्ताद हूँ, लेकिन मैं सिर्फ आपसे कह रही खुद ने क्या लिखा, आपका बैकग्राउंड भी हिंदी वाला, आप जिस संतति की बात करें, जिन किताबों की आपने जिक्र किया फैंटेसी में, चंद्रकांता संतति से बढ़ के कोई बड़ी फिक्शन में है नहीं फैंटेसी, और दुर्गा स्तुति से बढ़कर कोई और फैंटेसी है ही नहीं धर्मशास्त्रों में, ये मैं कहती हूँ क्योंकि मैं दुर्गा स्तुति पढ़ती हूँ. कहने का मकसद सिर्फ इतना ही है कि बोर्डिंग स्कूल में जाने के बाद और घर में रहने के बाद ये साहित्य सम्मेलन में एज ए हिंदी स्पीकर ओरिजिनली आप हिंदी में क्यों नहीं लिख पाए? वाई कुड यू नॉट राइट हिंदी फिक्शन एज इन हिंदी इंस्टेड ऑफ गेटिंग इट ट्रांसलेटेड?
क्योंकि अगर मैं हिंदी में लिखता मैम, I would have restricted myself to the Hindi readers. I wanted to reach a segment of readers जो इस चीज़ के बारे में जानते ही नहीं हैं और वो प्योरली इंग्लिश में पढ़ते हैं. अगर हम अपना अपना करते रह जाएंगे, अपने में ही रह जाएंगे. So I wanted to reach people like me. नहीं तो शायद सिर्फ हिंदी रीडर्स के बीच में रह जाती. And more importantly, जैसे नीना asked me why fantasy, I wrote fantasy because I knew fantasy. I knew English and I felt like I had more command over it, which is why. So that's where I slightly disagree with you because I didn't necessarily feel like Hindi was the right. अगर मुझे लगता कि हिंदी is my strongest suit, I would have gone ahead and written in Hindi. But I think बोलने में और लिखने में ज़मीन आसमान का अंतर हो सकता है. And writing मैंने English में practice की थी in school, not so much in Hindi. चाहे मैं घर में हिंदी में ही बोलता हूँ. So that's why and more importantly, like I said, my friends जो इंग्लिश में ही पढ़ते हैं, नॉर्मली इंग्लिश में ही बोलते हैं, उन लोगों को कभी नहीं पता चलता about these ancient scriptures if I hadn't presented to them in English. Thank you.
छोटा सा सुझाव, इतनी
जी।
आपने किताब बेच ली, एडिट कर ली, लिख ली, नाम सक्षम है, कोशिश करो हिंदी में लिखना शुरू करो.
जी जी, thank you.
Hello.
Thanks, Ajay.
Saksham, just in support of what you were saying, रमा जी के लिए बता रहा हूँ. Already, lot of our scriptures were in Hindi, but nobody was reading it anyways.
मैं वही कहा, उसमें रह
I
जाता.
myself have read Bhagavad Gita in English, okay, and I feel that in the villages where the language is spoken, in the Hindi is spoken. No, Hindi is spoken. Nobody is interested in this. So where the interest is, that entire set of people, they are now thinking and reading English. So I'm so glad you are out with this, but my question was something else. How will I recognize Shiva if he walks in right now?
That's fair. And you know, for that you have to read Samsara. क्योंकि जैसे ही भगवान सामने आते हैं, what are they wearing? How do they look? आप सोचो कि मैं as a 18-year-old student boy who didn't know anything is trying to describe how suddenly God सामने आते हैं. How are they? What are they looking? Are they glowing? Are they not glowing? कौन से युग का attire पहन रखा है? So many questions had to be answered. So honestly, I want to know your honest feedback on my interpretation. Please, awesome. I'll wait for your feedback. Brilliant. The 2 weeks is plenty of time. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So, oh, there's another question. Ask, I'll.
Awesome.
Just
Get a mic across to you.
Ask us, I'll repeat the question.
Kind
Hi.
of like read about where you come from, how, where, and I figured out about Bijit, who was from English literature, and you were in Saint Stephen's. So you were not? No, he was in Saint Stephen's.
I was in Hindu economics.
Hindu, yes, somewhere Bagal mein,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
So that
Delhi
way-
University. Yeah.
that way you come from economics background, he comes from English background. How was he helpful to you in editing the whole thing when the Samsara from your side was ready? With this, I will also like to add about how your during your undergraduate and postgraduate, people around you helped you because you started writing when you were 17. You were in 11th standard, but as you came up the undergraduate as a postgraduate, so the thing kept on increasing only. It never went back to where you were. So how people around you helped and how Bijit specifically?
So he's really good with structural plot. Developmental editing is when you look at a manuscript from a bird's eye perspective and you decide why things are happening, the loopholes, the character development. You're not fixing the grammar on the English. And that being his forte was so vital, because my way of looking at editing was restricted to first the things that were self-taught to me, and secondly, the way that Penguin did things. But he had experience in also academic editing. Having been an editor at Cambridge, that also came into the play. And of course, to answer your question, the second part of your question about how I went from 17-year-old, 11th grader, and the book evolved with me. That is one of the benefits of taking so long to write a novel, that it caters to both young adults. We have sold, 1/3 of the 30,000 copies just in schools, and then 2/3 of it is going to people who are, curious to know about the Vedas, and they're significantly older. So, ma'am, please do check out the book. You'll absolutely love the interpretation and the exploration of the Vedas. Thank you.
And the other question is, how do you think a reader who is agnostic or an atheist should approach towards this book, or does this book, kind of, what is the word? Does that book forces something on people who believe in God, or how an agnostic or an atheist person like me should approach towards it?
No, the book does the opposite. It accepts all different perspectives. And that's why you have so many different characters that are coming in. Because, if I didn't feel like I was going to be able to do something that inclusive, I would have never taken these characters. मैं डर के एक बहुत restrictive character line लेके चलता. But I wanted, so as an agnostic, as an atheist, as a true believer in God, all three have and already reached out and told me how much they love the book. And I'm so glad that's coming, because that's always been the aim.
So you also mentioned about how mobile phones have consumed us, right? And this is something very funny, but you were seen to put stories over Instagram about Samsara at literally 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. All right. So how do you think Samsara, the marketing and promotion of Samsara consumed you? Because that's what you were speaking about. Ki sone se pehle white screen, green light and stuff. So the contradiction. Would you like to answer that?
No, you make a very fair point. I'm talking about how reading should be done before going to bed. पर मैं 2-3 बजे आपने देखा है मैं stories डाल रहा हूँ. I promise you 3 बजे it doesn't matter what time of the day you're going to bed.
All right. And the last question, so about your marketing strategy. I'm sorry for bombarding.
No, I'm loving the questions.
So about your marketing strategy, I was there in the World Book Fair as well, and I did see you, selling your books to people. There are two things. People who actually didn't know about you and your book, they came and brought your book. But there is also something that people do. A lot of people don't read fantasies, and they walked into Penguin and they saw you and you're talking to people, because the main idea that you connected to your readers. So how do you think, maybe someone would have wanted to say no, but they got your book because it was difficult to say no. How much do you consider that your marketing strategy was appropriate, or how much do you think it can be criticized?
No, so this was a very fair question, and we addressed that. Pehle din jaake we realized that whether or not we should be doing this, and a lot of people told us that they're glad they're doing this. And no one was forced to pick up the book. I introduced the book.